자리하는 그 서울의 랜드마크 중 하나입니다. 제가 경복궁을 사랑하는 이유 이제 아시겠죠? 한국에 대한 잘못된 정보를 바로 찾는 일, 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
아리랑 아라리요 아리랑 고개로 넘어간다 힘껏 달려 멈추지 마라 세상 끝까지 가자 아리랑 아리랑 아라리요
In our headlines on this Monday, April 27th, here in South Korea, U.S. President Donald Trump is hurried out of a ballroom at Washington Hilton Saturday night at the start of an annual dinner for White House correspondents as a gunman opened fire near a security checkpoint inside the hotel. Meanwhile, the recently extended truce between Israel and Lebanon appears threatened as Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah exchange deadly fire in southern Lebanon while accusing each other of rampant ceasefire violations. Here on the local front, starting today, those eligible can sign up for the government's financial assistance of between 100,000 won and 600,000 won aimed at easing the burden of soaring fuel prices. We start in Washington, D.C., where President Donald Trump this past weekend survived an assassination attempt that targeted his top officials. Our Cho Young-in reports.
According to U.S. officials cited by the Associated Press, the suspect sent a manifesto to family members about 10 minutes before the shooting. The suspect was identified as Cole Thomas Allen, 31, from Torrance, California. The New York Post published what it said was the suspect's manifesto, in which he referred to himself as a friendly federal assassin. He said it was his duty to attack Trump administration officials. The document outlined his rules of engagement, included a list of targets ranked by priority, with Trump administration's officials at the top while detailing grievances against the administration. Speaking in a phone interview with Fox News, U.S. President Donald Trump said the suspect had written an anti-Christian manifesto and described him as someone with a lot of hatred in his heart.
And the guy is a sick guy. When you read his manifesto, he hates Christians. That's one thing for sure. He hates Christians, a hatred. And I think his sister or his brother actually was complaining about it.
According to investigators, Allen traveled by train from California to Chicago before heading to Washington and checked into the hotel several days before the event. Federal agents arrested Allen after he breached security at the Washington Hilton with a shotgun, handgun, and multiple knives, and fired at Secret Service agent, hitting the agent's bulletproof vest. Secret Service agents and police have since interviewed Allen's sister, who told investigators that her brother had legally purchased multiple firearms from a gun store in California and stored them at their parents' home without their knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, it's textbook lone wolf. Like I said, once we get into the ability to analyze his digital footprint, I think we're going to see that there were signs there.
The suspect is expected to appear in federal court on Monday on at least 2 charges of assaulting a federal officer and using a firearm during a violent crime. 조영은, Arirang News.
In other news, while direct discussions between delegates from the U.S. and Iran did not take place over the weekend in Pakistan, efforts to ease tensions continue behind the scenes. Our Pak Konu has the latest.
There were no further negotiations in Islamabad over the weekend, raising concerns that the conflict could last longer than expected. This comes after Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Muhammad Ishaq Dar posted on X that traffic restrictions around the key negotiating site, Islamabad Serena Hotel, and the Red Zone had been lifted as of Sunday after around a week. Dar thanked the people of Pakistan for helping ensure the safety of the guests and advance efforts for the region's peace, while saying Pakistan remains committed to such objectives. However, indirect communications behind the scenes are reportedly continuing. According to a U.S. official and 2 sources familiar with the matter speaking to Axios on Monday, Iran has proposed reopening the Strait of Hormuz and ending the war first, while postponing discussions on nuclear negotiations. It added that Iranian leaders are currently divided over which nuclear concessions to put on the table. The White House has reportedly received the proposal, but has yet to issue an official response. In an interview on Sunday, U.S. President Donald Trump said talks with Iran could continue if Tehran is willing, but suggested they could take place by a call, saying there's no point in sending delegations to travel for hours to meet. Trump also said he wants to maintain the naval blockade that's choking off Iran's oil exports, expressing hope that sustained pressure will force Tehran to concede in the coming weeks. Trump backed it up, saying that if Iran cannot continue exporting its vast oil supply through shipping routes, mounting internal pressure could push its oil infrastructure to a breaking point within days. Meanwhile, Trump is scheduled to meet with his top national security and foreign policy team on Monday to discuss the stalemated negotiations and possible next steps. With indirect efforts of negotiations continuing, attention is now on when the 2 sides might formally resume direct negotiations. Pak Konu, Arirang News.
Also in the Middle East, the recently extended ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon appears to have collapsed as Israel and Hezbollah exchanged deadly fire this past weekend. Our Ian Jin has more.
Sunday was another day of intense attacks across the Israel-Lebanon border. Lebanon's Ministry of Health said Israeli strikes on the country on Sunday killed 14 people, including 2 children and 2 women, and injured 37. The artillery and aerial strikes came after Israel Defense Forces issued evacuation warnings for several villages in southern Lebanon, which the IDF claims targeted Hezbollah operatives and sites used to advance attacks against its soldiers. Hezbollah also launched the suicide drone attack Sunday, targeting Israeli troops stationed in southern Lebanon, which the Israeli military said killed a 19-year-old IDF soldier and wounded 6 others. Separately, Hezbollah launched drones towards northern Israel. According to the IDF, all 3 drones were intercepted over the western Galilee area before crossing the border. Hezbollah has maintained limited military exchange with Israel since the start of a ceasefire on April 16th, which was extended by 3 weeks last Thursday. But the militant group argues that the very presence of Israeli ground troops in southern Lebanon constitutes a violation of the agreement. According to Reuters, hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah have been significantly reduced since the ceasefire. However, with continued attacks and both sides blaming the other for violating terms, the ceasefire has effectively collapsed. This comes as an end-of-war agreement between the U.S. and Iran becomes increasingly uncertain, while Israel continues to express its intent to intensify attacks on Hezbollah assets within Lebanon. 이은진, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung says Seoul will take proactive steps to restore cross-border trust and to promote peace on the Korean peninsula. In a message to mark the 8th anniversary of the Panmunjom Declaration on this Monday, he reaffirmed his administration's principles against acts of hostility, including unification through absorption. The declaration, signed in 2018 by then-President Moon Jae-in and North Korea's Kim Jong-un, includes pledges of denuclearization and a formal end to the Korean War. Global AI demand has pushed the local bourse to a major milestone in total market capitalization. Our Park Chun-han walks us through the numbers.
The total market cap of Korean stock markets for the first time surpassed 6,000 trillion won, or around $4.08 trillion US. On Monday, the Kospi closed at 6,615 points, its highest ever close, pushing the combined market cap to 6,104.7 trillion won. The Kospi accounted for 5,421.55 trillion won, the tech-heavy Kosdaq contributed 679.54 trillion won, and the small and medium-sized enterprise Konex market accounted for 3.59 trillion won. There has been an overall remarkable upward trend over the last year, with some major drops and rebounds. The 4,000 trillion won mark was crossed on the very first trading day of the new year. 5,000 trillion won was breached by February 3rd. While the outbreak of the war in the Middle East briefly pushed it back down under 5,000 trillion, markets have since shown a powerful recovery, adding more than 1,300 trillion in market cap in April alone. The Kospi has now risen more than 30% in April, over 53% this year alone, and 158% year-on-year. The primary driver has been the semiconductor sector, with Samsung Electronics and SK hynix together accounting for a significant portion of the Kospi's total weight. Their record-breaking first quarter earnings have reinforced expectations that the AI-driven memory supercycle is very much alive, drawing sustained inflows from both foreign and institutional investors. Beyond chips, semiconductor equipment, materials stock, and biotech shares contributed meaningfully to Kosdaq's advance. Looking ahead, global markets will be watching closely this week, as the Fed's FOMC meeting on Wednesday is expected to hold rates steady, with the accompanying narrative likely to be key. Attention will then turn to first quarter U.S. GDP data on Thursday. This week, we'll also see major U.S. big tech companies like Microsoft and Apple report their earnings. If U.S. tech giants deliver strong results and AI-driven momentum continues, it could provide another leg up for Korean markets. Park Chun-han, Arirang News.
And starting today, those eligible here in the country can sign up for financial assistance worth over 6 trillion won in total to help them navigate soaring energy prices. Our economics correspondent Kim Do-yeon reports.
Korea has begun officially deploying its high oil price relief fund to mitigate the economic impact of soaring living costs. The high oil price relief fund targets around 32.5 million people, making up the lower 70% of income earners. Monday's initial rollout prioritized the most vulnerable demographics. For basic livelihood recipients, those in the metropolitan area receive 550,000 won, or about $372, while residents in non-metropolitan or depopulated areas receive 600,000 won. Single-parent families and the next lowest income group receive 450,000 and 500,000 won, respectively.
The shock of such crises hits the vulnerable first and most harshly. In times like these, government finances must take the lead and serve as a breakwater to protect the public economy from the waves of crisis.
Others who are eligible will receive their payouts during the second phase, scheduled from May 18th to July 3rd. Payments range from 100,000 won, or roughly $68 for those in the metropolitan area, to up to 250,000 won, or $169, depending on region. Funds distributed via credit cards, check cards, or prepaid cards can be used the following day, while gift certificates picked up in person can be used immediately. To stimulate the local economy, usage of the relief funds is strictly limited. Recipients must spend the money within their registered residential city or county. Spending is also restricted to small businesses with annual sales under 3 billion won or approximately $2 million, excluding entertainment and gambling establishments. All distributed funds must be used by August 31st. As for foreigners, those registered at the same address as a South Korean national, as well as permanent residents, marriage migrants, and recognized refugees are eligible, provided they are enrolled in the National Health Insurance or Medical Aid programs. 김도현, Arirang News.
And now, for a gauge of the public response to this latest government effort aimed at easing the burden of the economic fallout of the Middle East unrest, our Kim Jun-ho was out on the streets of Seoul earlier in the day. Do take a listen.
The government's so-called high oil price relief fund come at a critical time. It's especially helpful for the initial group of recipients, which includes vulnerable people, many of them elderly.
I came to the community center to receive the payment. Prices are just too high these days, so it really helps, especially for daily expenses like groceries. It will cut my spending by almost half.
I receive basic welfare support regularly, but even with that, I have to be very careful with my spending. But with this additional payment, I can afford to visit the hospital and buy an extra side dish. It really helps with daily life.
Across the nearby shopping area, stores have started putting up stickers one by one, showing they accept the support payments. The latest cash assistance can only be used at small businesses with annual sales below $2 million. Here at this traditional market, merchants are already hoping for more customers from the first day.
Since the Middle East war began, the number of customers at my store has dropped by about 20 to 30% as people are holding back on spending. But once they receive this money, they may be more willing to spend again.
There was a time before when the government provided support payments, and it really helped. I'm hoping this will bring in more customers and help me run my business just like last time.
In past economic downturns, such as during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government provided financial support, often with a focus on the more vulnerable. The latest relief package follows a similar pattern.
Efforts to provide stronger support for vulnerable groups are generally welcomed. They could also help lift spending, even if only modestly, among those facing temporary difficulties.
With uncertainty still surrounding the Middle East conflict, attention is now on whether the support can help revive frozen consumer spending. Kim Jun-ho, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Friday this week, that is May 1st, is Labor Day, and the Lee Jae-myung administration has officially designated it as a public holiday. That being said, the Culture Ministry and the Korea Tourism Organization are seeking to bolster tourism within national borders. Accordingly, the so-called half-price vacation initiative is being expanded from the originally planned 100,000 participants to 145,000. Plans are also in the works for additional support for employees at small and medium-sized businesses and those working outside the capital area. Separately, starting Thursday this week for 1 month, the government will launch a promotional campaign titled Zero Departure Burden to encourage eco-friendly travel using public transport. Discounts of up to 30% will be offered for KTX tickets. Also, on the local front, South Korea has launched a comprehensive campaign aimed at advancing action against suicide, which remains a pressing national concern. Our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun files this report.
A message of connection and a reminder that support can come from many places. South Korea's Prime Minister Kim Min-seok on Friday launched the 1,000 Lives Guardian project at Cheonggye Plaza, setting a goal of reducing the number of suicide deaths by 1,000 this year. The initiative focuses on expanding prevention efforts beyond government policy, encouraging wider participation from communities, institutions, and the public. As part of that effort, a group of artists, entertainers, and public figures have been appointed as life ambassadors, using their platforms to share messages of support and awareness. Among them is NCT's Toyoung, who took to the stage to perform Sandbox, a song from his second solo album intended to serve as a source of energy and support for people struggling through tough times. In his remarks, the Prime Minister emphasized the role of connection in prevention.
I've come to believe that one of the most important ways to address the issue of suicide is to ease and share one another's sense of loneliness.
Here at Cheonggye Plaza, the focus is on making support more visible and more accessible. Officials say efforts like this aim to build a stronger sense of connection, making sure that people know where to turn when they need help.
The campaign also brings in dozens of organizations designated as guardian institutions, each working on tailored programs. Many attendees participated in interactive displays where they were encouraged to share messages of hope and solidarity for others. Among the corporate participants, SK Hynix showcased a booth featuring its AI-driven senior care technology, including the AI-friendly counseling center, which utilizes artificial intelligence to provide mental health screenings and emotional support for the elderly. The initiative comes as South Korea continues efforts to bring down its suicide rate, which remains among the highest in the OECD. Organizers say meaningful progress will depend not just on policy, but on sustained attention and participation across society. Arirang News.
And advances in production technology have made it possible to harvest figs in the milder months of spring rather than scorching summer, rendering the work involved more bearable for farmers. Our Cha Yun-kyung shows us how.
Over 1,000 fig trees inside a greenhouse are bursting with fresh, light green leaves. A young farmer picks a ripe fruit, which is about the size of a child's fist, from between the branches. While figs are typically harvested in midsummer, the introduction of harvest expansion techniques has made it possible to pick fresh fruit as early as spring.
By cultivating figs year-round rather than just in summer, I believe we can create a great synergy.
Fresh figs harvested in spring are highly valued due to their scarcity. They're typically sold for around 50,000 won, which is approximately $33 per kilogram, serving as a major income booster during the agricultural off-season.
Since there is almost no supply during the winter season, farmers can command premium prices by targeting high-income consumers who find these early fruits quite remarkable.
Unlike summer figs, which tend to soften quickly at room temperature, it is much easier to maintain freshness during the cooler winter and spring months. Moreover, a major benefit for farmers is the ability to avoid the grueling labor of working in the sweltering summer heat. This challenge to overcome seasonal limits is breathing new energy into rural communities. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Mali's Defense Minister Sadio Kamara was killed on Saturday when militants attacked his residence near the main army base outside Bamako. The al-Qaeda-linked group Jainim, working alongside a Tuareg rebel faction, hit multiple locations, including near the capital's airport and cities further north, including Mopti, Sevare, and Gao. The militants also claim to have captured the strategic city of Kidal, where Mali's military said operations were still underway. Russian mercenaries supporting the government were reported wounded. The attacks represent a significant setback for the government's Russia-backed security strategy. In the U.S., Kevin Warsh's path to leading the Federal Reserve cleared on Sunday after Republican Senator Thom Tillis said he would no longer block the confirmation. This follows the Justice Department's decision on Friday to drop its criminal probe into current Fed Chair Jerome Powell. With Tillis on board, Senate Republicans now have the votes to advance Warsh's nomination. Jerome Powell's term ends on May 15th, leaving the Senate just weeks to confirm his replacement. Kenya's Sabastian Sawe made history on Sunday at the London Marathon, becoming the first person to run an official marathon in under 2 hours. Sawe finished the race in 1 hour 59 minutes and 30 seconds. He broke the world record set by the late Kelvin Kiptum in 2023. Second-place finisher Yomif Kijelka of Ethiopia also finished under 2 hours, making it the most remarkable men's marathon podium ever. In the women's race, Ethiopia's Tigst Assefa broke her own world record, winning in 2 hours, 15 minutes, and 41 seconds. Chu Ji-han, Arirang News.
We saw unseasonably warm conditions over the weekend. Temperatures were running nearly a month ahead of schedule. But with rain moving in, that early summer heat has faded. In Seoul, tomorrow's high will be around 4 degrees lower than today. So keep that in mind before heading out. Rain will start moving into central regions tonight, helping to ease the dry conditions. Inland and mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province could see up to 20 millimeters, while Seoul and the capital area will get around 10. At times, the rain may come with gusty winds and lightning, so please take care. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 11 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 10 degrees, Daegu at 13 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 18 degrees, Daejeon at 19 degrees, Busan at 22 degrees. The rain will clear at different times, early morning in the Chungcheong-do provinces, into the afternoon around the capital area, and by evening in Gangwon-do province. After that, we're looking at clearer skies and pretty typical spring weather for this time of year.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon the South Korean economy. Do stay with us, and thank you for now.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, VANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?
내 곁에 있어줘 내게 머물러줘 네 손을 잡은 나 놓치지 말아줘 이렇게 네가 한 걸음 멀어지면 내가 한 걸음 더 가면 되잖아 그런 위로도 나의 줄 수 없지만 아무런 희망도 내 되어줄 수 없지만 그냥 함께 가보자 어떤 길이라도 나와 함께 가줄래
The South Korean economy rebounded in the first quarter of this year by 1.7% compared to the fourth quarter of last year to mark the highest quarterly expansion in over 5 years. We tell you how. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, April 27th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. We start our session this week with some optimistic economic news here in South Korea. For more on this, I have Celia Fioretti with French daily Le Croix here in the studio. Celia, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have freelance journalist Yang Chen Hao with us. Chen Hao, it's great to have you here.
Hello, thank you for having me in this fruitful day on the stock market.
Indeed, indeed. And before we touch upon the stock market, Celia, perhaps you could start with details about South Korea's first quarter economic growth.
Well, it came out much stronger than expected, showing a real rebound after a weak start of the year. According to the Bank of Korea, GDP grew by 1.7 quarter-on-quarter, which is quite significant. It's the fastest expansion since 2020 and a clear turnaround from the previous quarter contraction. On a year-on-year basis, while we don't have the precise headline figure, the underlying data is that there's a very strong annual momentum, especially driven by export and industrial output. Now, in terms of what really fueled that growth, the key driver here is very clear. It's AI and semiconductors. South Korea is a heavily export-dependent economy, and we saw exports rise by about 5.1% in the quarter, with semiconductor shipment surging more than 100% compared to last year, to a year earlier, and that reflects a global booming demand for AI-related chips, which are the new trend of semiconductor, with companies like SK hynix reporting massive profit increases. On top of that, there's also a solid investment growth, both in construction and facilities, and also a modest pickup, but still quite improving pickup in the private consumption. But this is important. The growth is quite narrowly based right now. More than 1% of GDP growth is just from the semiconductors and those AI chips. So it's still very vulnerable to cycle turns. If the trend were to be somewhere else, Korea would have time to catch up with that new trend. And there's already maybe warning sign with the rising oil prices. Might be the crisis might be there to stay for a long time. So there's a good rebound, but we have to be still a bit cautious, I would say, for the future perspectives.
Right. Chen Hao, in the meantime, as Celia just mentioned, SK hynix saw its profit soaring to an all-time high during the first 3 months of this year. Do tell us a bit more.
So over the past 2 decades, we know that the memory chip industry in the world was largely being dominated by Samsung Electronics, but in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen the rapid rise of SK hynix, mainly because it's the world's first company to develop and mass produce the high bandwidth memory, so-called HBM. And if traditional DRAM is like an ordinary road or street, then HBM can be regarded as the highway, the expressway of memory technology. And in fact, when HBM first debuted in the second half season of 2013, it drew a limited market attention because of its high cost, high price. But within the explosive growth of AI demand in recent years, like Celia just mentioned, the demand for memory capable of processing massive amounts of data at high speed has surged, and that has made HBM increasingly critical for the AI chips and data centers, driving sharp gains in both SK hynix earnings and stock price. And for the first quarter of the year, SK hynix reported revenue of 52.58 trillion won, about $35.5 billion, roughly triple from a year earlier. Operating profit came in at 37 trillion won, up 5-fold year on year, and actually started investing in the stock market around this time last year. I still remember when SK hynix shares were trading at 18,200 won, 182,000 won, and they are now today are now around like 1.2 million won, a 5.7-fold increase. Honestly, part of me regrets not buying more back then. If I had gone in heavily, I might be financially free and I can stay at home and like lying all the time now. And as many of you know, like since late last year, the AI boom has dramatically boosted the memory demand, and it has even given rise to a new term in the market, so-called chipflation. We have discussed about that before, reflecting how both conventional DRAM and HBM have become almost as expensive as gold. And SK Hynix says that while the first quarter is traditionally a seasonal slow period of the year, demand remained robust this year thanks to the expanding investment in AI infrastructure. And the company also adds that as AI evolves from large model training toward real-time inference across border service environments, what the industry calls agentic AI, memory demand is expected to keep rising and growing.
Right. Celio, as Chen Hao just mentioned, the local bourse, it's been noting a remarkable performance in recent times, of course. Even today, it marked a major milestone in terms of total market capitalization. How are analysts explaining the rally here in the local stock market, despite the unrest in the Middle East?
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive with the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East, but we see this rally in the South Korean equities actually the result of a combination of structural and cyclical factors. So first, there's what many call buy the dip dynamic. When the Iran-related tension escalated earlier this year, the Kospi actually plunged sharply, more than 18% on the first day. But that sell-off was seen as overdone, and as soon as fears eased slightly, investors rushed back in, triggering a strong rebound. And second is what we just mentioned before, the semiconductor super cycle that is now trending. We see companies like SK Hynix booming demand, so that also fuels a lot of investments. And the third factor, I would say, is more on the domestic side and even like political side. Since President Lee Jae-myung took office, the government really pushed corporate governance, the change aimed at reducing the so-called Korean discounts, and measure like limiting duplicate listings, have improved investor confidence in the Korean market, especially among foreign investors. So there's all of those three factors playing up. And finally, there's also a bit of a global attention gap, I would say. While global headlines were focusing on Iran, on Ukraine, the strength of Korean market has gone relatively under the radar. People didn't pay much attention, which paradoxically helped sustain a very stable inflow of currencies and investment without overheating the market too quickly, even though it is really rising well. So in short, what analysts see is that this rally is not against the global turmoil and the oil crisis, but also it's partly because of it. And Korea found a good way to have more opportunities through the crisis, with still like strong fundamentals of the Korean market, which is tech and export-driven products.
Right. Chen Hao, Bloomberg says that AI chip demand has raised South Korea as well as Taiwan in global equity rankings. How high do these two countries stand, and what are the broader implications of this reality?
So as AI drives an explosive surges in memory demand globally, the beneficiaries in South Korea have been Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, and in Taiwan, the key winner has been TSMC, of course, because South Korea's HBM chips are ultimately shipped to Taiwan for advanced packaging and back-end processing by TSMC before being delivered to their end customers. And then the AI boom has also fueled strong performance in both South Korean and Taiwan stock market. This year, even today, both have hit record high. And South Korea's stock market capitalization stood at $2.83 trillion, ranking 8th globally, while Taiwan's reached $4.14 trillion, ranking 6th in the world. And much of that growth is now being driven by heavyweight technology stocks as AI technology continues to develop and spread. And Asia is further cementing its central role in the global economy, even amid external external risks such as tariff and the conflict involving in Iran recently, but still we can see that the growth is still ongoing. Another notable trend in the market is the growing participation of retail investors in both South Korea and Taiwan. Like me, we do some stock market. Beyond institutional money and large overseas funds or capital, local individual investors are playing an increasingly role recently. For example, in South Korea, retail investors are often nicknamed as ants. And many students and parents we saw like they are participating in the stock market, hoping to build funds for future, for example, family needs or entrepreneurship or retirement. And as AI adoption explodes recently, more people are recognizing the trend and stepping further into the market recently, and domestic investigators are becoming increasingly influential forces across the Asian financial market. And still, an analyst warned of the concentration risk in South Korea. Kospi is heavily dependent on Samsung and SK Hynix, which together account for roughly 42% in the index. The same thing happened in Taiwan, which TSMC alone makes up about 40% of the Taiwan capitalization weight stock index. So with the technology stocks carrying such dominant weightings, both markets are becoming increasingly reliant on the narrow group of companies and mostly AI or technologies, raising concerns about heightened vulnerability if the sector turns.
Right, and speaking about retail investors or individual investors here in South Korea, quite a number of them are reportedly choosing to expand their U.S. equities. Could you tell us a bit more about this phenomenon, Silio?
Yes, that's quite the most striking trend these days. Even as the domestic market rallies, South Korean investors are increasingly looking outwards, and especially to the U.S. market. In fact, South Korea has become the one of the largest buyers of U.S. equities globally, with about $73 billion net in purchases in 2025 alone. It's more, nearly 5 times more than the year before. And a big part of that is what we call here the end investors, the small retail investors. And these are people who are driven by a desire to shift their portfolio to an overseas market. What's interesting is that it's happening despite a strong performance here in the local domestic market, the KOSPI, but maybe because they see the U.S. market as a more profitable and more stable in the future. Maybe the too fast rise of the KOSPI is scaring them. They might feel maybe the heydays are today, but maybe it will fall back again later. So they see the U.S. market as more stable. And there's a few reasons for that. First, there's historical performances. The U.S. indices like the S&P 500 have outperformed Korean stocks in most recent years. So there's a perception of maybe more consistency in the U.S. market. And second, also corporate governance and shareholders in return. U.S. companies are generally seen as a more transparent and more shareholder-friendly with dividends, buybacks, and a clearer communication inside the company. So that also could attract, and also just people want to diversify their assets. They don't want to put all their eggs in the same basket. With the very fluctuating world these days, a lot of instabilities, they want to have at least, maybe if it fails in Korea, it might succeed in the US. So they want to balance their loss and try to diversify as much as possible their portfolio to ease their loss. And as Chenao said, the goal for them now is more to build a future for their families, maybe buy estate later or assure like a financial freedom. So that's a good way for them. They see it to also buy in the U.S. market.
Right. Moving forward, Shin-Hao, last week the Bank of Korea ushered in its new governor, Shin Hyun-song, who shared some of his plans while he will be in office, of course. What can we expect?
For the past 4 years, the governor of Bank of Korea was Lee Chang-yong, and following the end of his term, economist Shin Yong-sung took over as the new governor just last week. And in his inaugural address, Mr. Shin said he plans to push for the internationalization of Korean won, and the Bank of Korea will also work with the government to promote a 24-hour foreign exchange trading system and an offshore won clearing framework, measures aimed at making the Korean won easier to use overseas around the world. However, the broader environment now remains highly challenging, as we know that despite the strong performance of Korean equities, the stock market, the Korean won itself is hovering near the 17-year low of around 1,500 won to the US dollar. Rising oil prices also adding the inflationary pressure, while population decline in South Korea continues to erode the labor force. So Mr. Shin himself acknowledged those risks, saying that the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East remain severe and global oil prices are still significantly above pre-war levels, and uncertainty persists around global trade conditions as well as the monetary and fiscal policies of major economies. So as a result, he warned that South Korea itself is still facing rising inflationary pressures alongside increasing downside risks to growth. He added that amid heightened economic uncertainty, maintaining the price stability and financial stability will be the core priorities guiding monetary policy, with the aim of supporting steady economic growth. Attention now turns to tomorrow, April 28th, when Mr. Shin will chair his first monetary policy board meeting, and markets will be watching closely for what signals he will send. Because the biggest factor shaping this, shaping the Bank of Korea next move remains the Federal Reserve in the United States. The FED is widely expected to hold rates steady for a third consecutive meeting at the end of this month, while in South Korea, markets likewise expect the Bank of Korea to keep its benchmark rate unchanged for an 8th straight decision. So at this stage, there is little room, little space for the Bank of Korea to maneuver.
Right. In the meantime, Celia, what more can you tell us about the current state of the South Korean currency, the won, and the country's foreign currency deposits, that is?
Well, the picture now is a picture of pressure on South Korean economy and a currency, and a very sharp reaction from companies holding foreign currencies. The Korean won has been significantly weakening, moving from around 1,440 per dollar in late February to now 1,530 by the end of March. So that's a notable depreciation in a short period of time, largely tied to global instabilities, especially rising oil prices and safe haven flows into the US dollar. So now what's really interesting is how companies have responded to that. According to the Bank of Korea, foreign currency deposits dropped by a record $15.4 billion in March, bringing the total down to about $102 billion. And that decline was overwhelmingly made by corporate accounts, not households. And what firms are essentially doing with this is that they're taking advantage of a weaker won, converting the dollar holding back into the local domestic currency, and that allows them to settle some payments, manage tax, and rebalance their finances to have a more favorable exchange rate. And dollar deposits alone fell by over $10 billion, with euro and yen holding also declining. So this is a broad-based shift across currencies and sectors. And at the same time, there's still, of course, an underlying demand for dollar, and especially given Korea's heavy reliance on energy import. So while this conversion may temporarily help support the won, the broader pressures, the oil crisis, the international instability still remain real and pretty much in place. But so overall, you have a weaker currency environment combined with a tactical response by the companies rapidly adjusting their foreign currency holdings to navigate that volatility of the market these days.
Right. Also on a cautious note, Chen Hao, the OECD has forecast that South Korea's potential growth rate may decline to 1.7% range, that is, this year, and it fall even deeper next year. Could you tell us a bit about this particular outlook and the reasons behind it?
Yes, while we see the market, the stock market is doing really well, but the broader economic growth remains far less encouraging. When what economists call the potential GDP growth refers to the fastest pace an economy can grow without triggering the inflation, and it is widely seen as a measure of countries' underlying economic strength. And South Korea's potential growth rate is projected to fall from 1.92% last year to 1.71% this year, a decline of 0.21 percentage points, and that would mark the 16th consecutive annual decline in South Korea's potential growth rate since 2012, when it stood at 3.63%, and making the country one of the few in the world facing such a prolonged structural slowdown. And business leaders and academies say that this trend reflects unresolved structural problems, including an unprecedentedly low birth rate in Korea, great population aging, getting old, and an industrial structure overly dependent on a narrow range of sectors such as semiconductors, as we mentioned. And another closely watched indicator is the GDP gap, calculated by the subtracting actual GDP from potential GDP and dividing that figure by potential GDP. South Korea's GDP gap has remained in negative territory, suggesting that the productive resources, including industrial capacity and labor, are not being fully utilized.
Right, unfortunately, of course. Well, on that cautious note, I'm afraid we'll have to end today's talk. Chen Hao, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Hope we can have financial free sooner or later.
Right, fingers crossed for that. Silio, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, and that ends Monday's edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow with more panel discussions, so do join us then, and thank you for now.
안녕하세요, 소란입니다. 아리랑 TV의 개국 30주년을 진심으로 축하드립니다.